and just beat on this bearing and knock it off. Once you have the bolt. Hi there folks, and welcome to another episode of Michael's Backyard Marina. What do we got for you today? Well, I'm going to tell you what we got for you today. We got a little tiny gearbox right here. This is off a Mercury 9.9. And what we're going to do is take it apart. This one's a little noisy. There was water came out of the gearbox. So we're pretty much understanding that a lot of stuff in here may not be in great shape. Bearings could be a little nasty. Maybe, maybe not. But for one thing for sure is we're going to replace all the seals in this particular gearbox. Now I've already got the water pump pulled off of there. You know, that's pretty straightforward. There's basically just, let's call it 2 bolts that hold the water pump in place. Just that simple. We got a new water pump coming for it, a new impeller. We got a housing that that's in good shape. I've already bought the housing. I forgot to buy the impeller. So now I had to buy another kit for $36 that came with an impeller. So anyway, we're going to tear this bad boy apart. We're going to look at all the pieces, and then I'm going to show you how I disassemble the pieces. And we're going to put all new bearings, new seals, new O-rings. I started talking like there was going to be 4 things, but those 3 things. And we'll discuss some of the inner workings as we go through here. One of the things you want to make sure if you ever pull one of these apart, whatever you do, don't pull this little seal out here. We're going to get close. Don't pull this out without holding down on this if you're going to replace the seals in here. Otherwise, you will be pulling your entire gearbox apart when you don't want to. So, but anyway, let's just dive right in and show you what I do to take this bad boy apart. And this is like a, you know, this is vintage 60s and 70s. And I'll tell you where you get your parts from. There's 3 locations you get your parts from. When it comes to the bearings and whatnot, go to marineengine.com. I'll put that right down here, marineengine.com. I'll put the wwws in the links in the description below. But marineengine.com is one for bearings and whatnot and seals. Crowley Marine, my experience hasn't been as wonderful with them. They do have the parts. And their lead time can be a little longer. But Crowley Marine is a second option for this type of stuff. Now, for things you can't find that's obsolete in Crowley Marine and marineengine.com, you go to a place called oldmercs.com. 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 They will have pump and impeller kits for these and a few other things and carburetor kits that other places just are obsolete or don't have. Now, when you're working on Mercuries, I'll tell you right out front, Mercuries are not cheap to work on in comparison to Johnson or an Evinrude. I'm not sure why that is, but the parts and componentries are much more expensive for a Mercury than they are. It's been my experience so far. There again, I haven't been doing this for 30, 40, 50, 60 years like other folks out there have been. I'm just telling you what I've been playing around with for the past few years, my experience on what I bought and what I've located, because I shop. Mercury componentry is more than Evinrude or Johnson componentry, especially in the old stuff. I don't know. Honestly, I have to be honest with you. I don't know anything about anything newer than let's just call it 80. What have I got? What's my newest thing I got? 87? 88? Is the newest engine, boat, or outboard that I own. That's the newest, right? So I'm drawing from the experience that I have experienced. Without further ado, let's get in here and see what's in here. This is scary for a lot of people. You don't need to be scared. I'm going to show you some little tricks and little techniques and some homegrown tools type of thing to get this apart. And you will never be afraid of a Mercury gearbox ever again. You will be able to lay your head on a pillow and go, oh, Mercury, I used to be so afraid of you, and now I'm not. That's where we're going to get to, right? Right now. Right now. I am a man of constant sorrow. Five-eighths locking nut. Prop removed. Spacer removed. Now there's a plastic spanner in here and it's left-hand thread, so you got to turn it clockwise to get it out. Use a little brake cleaner to kind of, clean it up. There we go, we got some good clean threads. I don't know that I have a spanner. Once you got that out, it's easy street. Now, I do realize, for everybody watching, that I should not have used a punch on that. I should have used a spanner wrench. I get it. I don't have one, okay? So that's what I used. All right, what you're gonna see here is a little specialty tool I made. I bent over, cut the heads off some bolts, bent them over, and put some nuts and drilled 3 holes in a piece of wood. I've used this before, it seemed to work pretty well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in here, and I put them in there and I hook them into that piece you saw in there so I can pull it out. And gently and carefully and you could probably get in there with a little tiny slide hammer and do the exact same thing, but that way this all comes apart just like that. Just so easy and peasy, right? A little bit of gear oil in there. But now we can remove my puller. But yeah, that whole piece comes out as one unit. You got this little thing here that goes in there and pushes against your shift shaft. But all this will come apart and we'll be able to disassemble this and replace bearings. Pretty slick, right? There's 2 bearings inside here. There's one inside here. There's a seal. Another one here. There's a shim. And then you got an O-ring on the outside here between this washer. But yeah, so there's some cute little gears. Just cute. We'll go ahead and reach in here and I'll show you what we got to go after next. Now the next order of business inside here is to get this little pinion gear off the end of that shaft. And there's a little tab that you got to bend up before you can get a hold of that head of that bolt. Once you have it bent up flat, you can get your wrench in there and break it loose. This one takes a 3/8 wrench to get in here, and it is going to be right-hand thread, so just your normal everyday thread, right? Once you get it broke loose, you should be able to just hold on to it and spin the shaft to back it out. Now there's a bearing on this shaft that's got a shoulder against it and a snap ring on top. The whole gear and everything's got to come out the top. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. And this isn't really cheating, but this is just making it life easier on yourself. The cool part is the aluminum will grow at a much higher rate than the bearing will. And I've got a vice grip right here, and I'm not marring up the shaft at all. I've got the vice grip right on the flat where the key would be for the water pump impeller. And I'm just getting a nice firm grasp on it here. And just get a good bite on it there. Then I'm going to warm it up through here. And what that's going to do is expand this housing. It'll let that bearing go. With a couple light taps, I should be able to just knock that right out of there. And there's no seals or anything you're worried about hurting here by warming this up. And this aluminum will grow at a very fast. You should be able to not even burn the paint. Once we got a little warmed up like that, let's give it a tap and see what happens. Look at that. Just slides right out. Otherwise, you'd have to beat that out of there. Take note, there is a shim right here. Want to keep track of all your shims. Underneath it, there's another shim. So put those on your shaft so you don't forget where they're at. Now you'd be able to see your gear on the inside pop free. And here's your little lock washer that we bent the tab on right there. So that was easy. Just those little tech tips like that make this job go a whole lot easier. Now you're asking yourself, well, there's a bearing down in there. Let me show you that one. We got one more bearing and gear to remove right down in here. See that one? She makes a little noise. You can hear it. That actually, if it's a brand new bearing, you wouldn't hear that if it's got a little bit of oil on it. It'd be just dead silent. So we got to get that one out. I'm going to show you how I get that particular one out. We're going to take this housing and we're just going to tip it down. Now be careful, this is still probably a little warm. I can put my hand on it. That just tells you how hot I didn't get it. It's warm enough to touch, but definitely not warm enough to burn you or take any paint off. Now what I'm going to do is point this straight down. And I'm going to go ahead and take the old oil drain plug out. Just because, you know, maybe you want to reuse that gasket and you don't want to get it hot or too hot. Chances are that gasket's toast because it's, you know, from 1960 something. Now here, I've got my little ball peen hammer handy, just right over here. But typically, I should be able to just warm this up and catch this in my hand. Let's see how this works. Now I'm going to warm it up pretty evenly. Just like that. Just that little bit of growth was enough to make it let go. And the other thing you want to watch for is there's a shim behind this one right here. So keep all your shims in order. These are to get all your spacing and your gear patterning to be correct. And when we go to put this back in, we'll do the same thing. We'll set it in there, get it upright, and we'll warm this up and it'll drop it back in. The last thing we got to remove here is the shift shaft itself. And inside there you can see that little cam that goes back and forth. You got to take note on which way that cam is facing. So when you go all the way to the left, you can see the lobe is pointing this way. If you go all the way to the right, you don't see that groove except on the very end. So this is the direction it goes back in there. I'm not sure that you couldn't put it in upside down. I haven't tried. But this is the direction it goes in, and I'm going to show you how you get that out right now. So what you're going to do is take a little wrench, back this little guy off right here. This actually pushes down into a groove that's on this bushing here. And this bushing has an O-ring on the outside. And I've seen people doing stuff where they crack this because I think they tried to take it out without backing off this little locking screw here. That's all it is. And then This will lift right out, just like that. You got an O-ring seal here, and you got another shaft seal there. There's a collar there, or an E-clip that holds that in location. So when this is all down, it's all trapped. Now that gear is loose inside there. That shift paw that's down in there is now loose. We'll pull it out. All right, that's this disassembly of the gearbox. So we've got it completely disassembled. There's nothing left in here to take apart other than maybe this fill screw hole here, and that's it. Nothing else. That was relatively simple. Couple little tricks, helped you get it out. Not any really, the closest thing I came to a specialty tool is this little homegrown thing, and it really doesn't take much effort. Now, if you live in saltwater climates, or where saltwater climates, near saltwater, and this might have been used in saltwater, some of this stuff may be permanent in this gearbox that you can't get out. The people that work on these near saltwater areas, don't be afraid to leave a comment down below and share with the rest of the group here that's watching how much of a pain it is or isn't to work on stuff that's been in saltwater and not necessarily, freshwater rinsed after every use to make sure corrosion doesn't happen. All right, so this is clean. We can clean this up. My choice of cleaning this up is taking brake clean and flushing it out and blowing it out, depending on what kind of stuff you got in there. Typically, it's pretty clean inside there because you've had oil. It hasn't been exposed to the elements. Unless there's been water and some corrosion going on. That's another problem. So I would flush this out with brake cleaner, and then we'll be ready to put it back together. Now, the cool part is I'm going to show you how to take the bearings off the gears the way I did it. I'm not saying it's the right way, but a lot of people out there don't have specialty tools to get this stuff apart. And I'm going to show you the way I take it apart. And so far, I've had pretty good luck, and I haven't damaged anything. Yes, I should probably buy a couple more specialty tools, but I don't do a lot of gearboxes. Most of the gearboxes that, if they're junk, they are junk. They're not worth just putting new seals in. Now, there's quite a few of them that do just need seals, and there's ways to pluck the seal out of here and pluck the seal out of here and put new ones in without a full disassembly of this nature. But if you got, like on this particular one, if you got an O-ring leaking, you've got to pull it apart. But that's where pressure testing / vacuum testing can help. Once we get done putting this gearbox back together, we'll do a little quick pressure test with some soapy water and see if we get any bubbles under 5 pounds of pressure. If we don't, we're golden. Now, you can use pressure, you can use vacuum. Some people recommend both. Pull a vacuum on the whole thing and see if it holds the vacuum. Because the seals, they're keeping oil from coming out and water from getting in. All right, let's get busy disassembling the sub-assemblies that go in here. This guy is just waiting for me to do that now. Now, when it comes to taking the bearing off of this drive shaft, pretty simple. Remove the snap ring. I'm keeping track of the shims here. They're still hanging on here. And make sure you keep track of see, this one has 2 on this side. This one has 1 thicker one on this side. So you want to keep track of that. Make notes. Write it down on a piece of paper. Set these down on paper with a note next to it of what end this shaft goes onto. But this is pretty simple here, so I'm not going to waste your time showing you how to do it. I'm just going to tell you, this has got a snap ring right here. Once the snap ring's off, you can take a hammer and just beat on this bearing and knock it off. You're not worried about hurting this bearing. This is the old bearing. Now, when you go to put the new bearing back on, you want to put it back on by sliding something. Whoops. When you go to put the new bearing back on, you want to have something that slides over the shaft and hits on the inner race, and then you can tap that piece of tube or a socket or whatever it hits on that inner race that you can get to work on here, and put it back against the shoulder, put that snap ring back on. This piece will be done. Now, this particular gear, so we got a shim here. This is the gear that we heated up and dropped out of the inside. We're going to pull this bearing off here, and then there's another roller needle bearing, not a roller bearing, but a Torrington style needle bearing inside here. We need to remove both of those. So we'll do that next. Once we're done doing that, we'll take this shaft. This shaft can slide all the way out. Don't lose your little pin here. But you can take and remove this shaft all the way out of here. And you got a shim that was on this side. Don't forget where that goes. So I'm going to keep that with me. When I go to work on this, I'm going to keep this shim following me around wherever it goes. this shaft, your drive shaft here, and your pin with the pointed end out, you can keep together like that till you're ready to put it back together. Now you guys are going to think this is rude and crude and unbelievable, right? So all I'm going to do is take a chisel and I'm going to put it right in between this gear and this bearing and give it a light tap. And as you can see, it starts separating the bearing. Then I got a chisel that's a little wider. Now I'm being careful to protect that gear. We don't want that gear getting hurt. Then I got an even wider one to go in there, and then you're going to work it on each side and keep tapping it like that. Once you got it that far apart, you can grab the bearing in the vise and hold on to it and take your punch and punch that gear the rest of the way out of there. That's what I'm going to be doing. We're going to do the same technique with this guy. We're going to go between this washer and the bearing and just give her some taps and she starts coming apart. Huh, this one is funny. The actual shaft is coming out of the bearing. When I did it before, I've had the bearing stay on this particular gear, but it's just doing the opposite of it this time, which that's fine. I can get in here with the punch and finish punching the rest of it out. So I got my little pin punch here. I'm just going to hold it and support it, and so now the bearing, same thing. So here's a little O-ring that's in here, sits right here. There's another bearing in here we'll knock out. So right now what I'm going to do is I can take this bearing and reach in from this direction. Actually, I'm going to make it easier on myself. If I support this, I can actually knock the seal out first. And I just take a socket that's a little bit bigger than the seal, so I can get down here on that seal and give her some hits. There she goes. So now that the seal's out, you can easily knock this bearing out that's in here. There, that bearing's removed. Now, just like the other piece, we got to get let's put all these pieces back here, just to keep track of them. The seal back here. And then we'll go get it on the vise, grab a hold of this bearing, and knock this the rest of the way out. Pretty simple. Now I can gently just like that, we got this spacer and this bearing separated from the gear. And you saw me catch the gear because you don't want to drop these on the ground. Why risk damaging them? Now we can reach in here and knock out that roller bearing in here, or the needle bearing that's in here. Now just that quickly, we've got the entire gearbox, fully disassembled. The only thing I haven't done yet is take the bearing off the drive shaft, the vertical drive shaft. And that's okay. We're gonna do that. Only takes a matter of another couple minutes to take that snap ring off, drive that bearing off. We'll get to that on the reassembly. Now, when you go to marineengine.com, the reason I like to buy from them is they have the schematics for everything this engine has going on. Shows you the order in which it goes back together. Has numbers next to each part, which you can go on their website and look at every part number as you're taking it apart. And you know exactly what you need to order for replacements. And the cool part is you'll have a part number. Because if they don't have it or it's no longer available, you might be able to take that part number and go search on eBay or Google and actually obtain the part number from another source. But give marineengine.com, a shot at it, or oldmercs.com. Old Mercs has a lot of the wear out items that you normally would have as a wear out, water pumps, stuff like that, carburetor kits. As far as when it comes to bearings and gearbox housings, maybe not so much. So, all right, all that's left to do now is clean up all the pieces. So we got them all fresh and clean, no grit, no dirt. Make sure we got a good clean work surface so we can start reassembling things back together. Now, on the bench here, I'm going to show you. Well, I don't have to show you, but I'll aim it in that general direction. But I've got things grouped together as it came apart. So when I put the bearings, grab the bearings new bearings out of the packages, I can go ahead and put that assembly back together. Once that's back together, it's done. This assembly I can put back together with all its bearings and it's done. And then the shaft. And once that's all put together, these assemblies are reassembled back together, we can put it back in the gearbox. And it's just that easy with all new seals, all new O-rings. Things should be watertight. All right, first order of business is you want to clean your shift shaft completely off. Our wire wheel at the ends got her nice and clean, degreased. And this piece here, if you've ordered the right kit, you'll have a new seal here. This I just held on to it, took a screwdriver and popped it out. Drove the new one in flush. We put the new O-ring on. Good gosh, that dried my hands out. That's okay. But what we want to do now is protect everything because you don't want to put this together completely bone dry. I'm going to take a little cap here and I'm going to put a little 75W90 gear oil in it because that's what I'll fill this unit up anyway. So let's just, give that little half a squirt there. And so this don't get too messy, I want to put a little bit, we're going to put a little bit on this O-ring so it doesn't have to go in dry. And we'll just dip this end so the seal's nice and wet. This has a little ring right here, a little trapped ring. So when you slide this back together in the right direction, that this seal should just easily slide and this will come down to a stop around that ring. So it's a nice, firm stopping point. So now the shift shaft is going to be nicely sealed. This is going to be lubricated to go back into the case. And it'll be great, right? Now, what goes in the case is this little paw right here. And this will only go together one way. As you can see, I can't put it together like this. But if I flip it around, and it is a skip tooth. So there's a missing tooth here, and there's a missing tooth in here. That's designed to line up. If you try to put it together upside down and backwards, let's see if I can do it. It will go. Scary enough, right? So which way should it go back together? Well, I'll tell you which way. The way that it slides on the farthest. This has got a crown surface here on one side and the other surface is flat. You want to put the crown side down. And you can also see the witness mark here where it's been riding. And this should slide on. As soon as I get it on the right mark here, boom, boom, boom. Where's it at? Where's it at? Come on. I can't see it now. It's all full of oil. So you can see where it's been riding. And it should be allowed to float up and down just a little bit because the detent that goes in here from the drive shaft is going to ride right in the middle here. Now I'm going to do my best to get you where you can see this. It might be difficult. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a magnet. So I'm going to hold this drive shaft just like this. Whoa, that almost slid off. Just like this, I'm going to stick a magnet right on here. And that's going to hold that on the end while I slide this particular shaft. So right now it goes in pretty much just like that. So I'm holding it straight in and straight in, right? So that way when I go to slide it together inside here, I can do the same thing. So I'm going to slide the drive shaft down inside. So I can get the shaft to slide in there like that. I should be able to get this to line up with it. It's not going to be crazy easy, but I think I can do it. That was a little bit tricky. I know that wasn't slick and skillful, but I got it in there. I actually ended up getting it down in there and holding a screwdriver up against it and kind of working the splines back and forth till I got it to go in. But now you can see really kind of hard to screw that up because it only goes in one way, in one direction. And that's how it's supposed to work. If you had it flipped around the other direction, it would be facing the wrong way. And I don't believe it would work. It would work. It wouldn't work. It has to go in like that. So it is kind of a nice setup as far as not being able to go together wrong, as far as being able to put it together backwards. The next order of business is making sure this is down seated, which it is. And then you can put in this little, remember the square screw we took out? Whoop, this guy right here. We got to stick that back in. Now once you got that tight, you still got to make sure this shaft can slide up and down. It's not fully trapped, so you got to be careful not to pull it out. Once you've got that order of business taken care of, it's time to put the gear. It's time to put the new bearing on this gear and install that back in place. And then we'll be able to install the drive shaft. Okay, you guys remember where I heated this up and I had this gear fall out? We got our brand new gears here, brand new bearings, new inner bearing, new outer bearing, carefully installed. Now these I just took I put this down on the bench with some protective surface here, and I was able to tap this bearing down till it's seated. And then I was able to use a socket to install this bearing and carefully put it in place as well. So now I'm going to set this down in here. I'm going to use my handy dandy magnet to kind of set it and get it started in there straight. Now it's kind of just setting in there right now. I'm going to take my torch one more time. And remember, we didn't have to grow this very much to get it to go in there. So we're just going to warm it up here. I already felt it slide down a little bit. Now I just wanted to give it a little tap. Oh my goodness, that thing spins like a top. Now right now it spins pretty freely because we don't have any lube in it. The thing's still spinning. So that's installed. Next thing we need to do is install our drive shaft. Now the drive shaft, we've got our bearing on it, our snap ring, and we've got the gear that goes in there like this. So we can actually slide the drive shaft in there with this gear kind of at the same time. It's going to be hard to show you doing it, but I'll show you what it looks like after I've done it. Now that I've got that drive shaft installed, I'm going to take you and give you a peek down in here so you can see what's going on. Now I've got the bearing on this other side. I'll show you that in a second. This should move freely. You should feel no binding. It should be just as smooth as butter. You're running on bearings here. This should be as smooth as butter, which is exactly what's going on here. Now you guys might be thinking, why are you putting this thing together dry? Why aren't you putting oil on it? Well, guess what? When you get this thing all put together, you're going to fill the entire thing up with gear lube. It's going to be filled. This whole area, every open pocket will be filled with gear lube. So I don't have to worry about, trying to make sure it's not going together dry. Now we got to get the little bolt back in there. I'm going to try to hold on. This has got a little lock washer. It's got little ears on it that actually will engage with the gear itself. So you can tighten it down without that spinning, and then it's going to have this little lock tab that you bend over to keep it from backing out. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just rotating the shaft. Makes it easy while it's drawing the bolt in. Then I want to make sure the lock washer falls into one of the teeth, you know, lines up in the teeth in the gear itself. Once you have the bolt tightened up, you want to take that little lock washer and you want to bend it over. Now what I have is a custom made screwdriver that's got a really sharp edge on it. So it gets that to bend out. Once I get it bent out, I can take a regular screwdriver or your choice of punches and I could flatten that right out. Now that we have that installed, we are ready to put the other housing together. Now here's where we put this all back together new. We've got a needle bearing to put back in here. We've got a bearing to stick in here. We got our one washer. Remember this gear sat out here. So we got, that's an old seal. This is where the new seal will go in. Bada bing, just like that. But that's after we put the bearing in. And after we clean it up. So let's clean it up first. Because we got new bearing, and new seal, and new O-ring. And then we can put all this back together. And don't forget, we got to put the shims where the shimmies belong, right? All right, we've installed the new bearing inside this housing, which goes down in. You can see where the old one was, and you can put it right back in the same spot. We've installed the new seal. This is the seal that's important. This keeps water out of your gearbox, along with this brand new O-ring that's out here. So when you put this back in, you got your gear that has the bearing on the outside, right? And then you've got the washer. And then you've got your new O-ring. The O-ring out on the outside here is also the other thing that keeps the water, because water can get all up in here, but it can't get past that O-ring, and that's what seals up your gearbox on the outside of this. So the inside, outside. These two seals are very important. Just like, I mean, every seal is important on a gearbox because it runs under water, and you got to keep that dry. But man, look at those bearings. They're just beautiful now. This is our drive shaft that we'll be sticking back in next. Let's do that right now. I do have my little cap of oil here. I'm going to go ahead and, you know, some of this stuff I'm going to go ahead and put some lube on here. And what that's going to help is the seals slide over things better. Same way inside here. I want to make sure I've got some lube inside here so things slide together with the greatest of ease. So now we've got, don't forget this little plunger, it's got to go here. That's what moves. When you push on this, that makes this gear move back and forth. This is part of your shifting mechanism. You got to have that. So that's all back together there. Now we can carefully slide this back together. And I put, there again, there's the reason I put lube on that O-ring is so it'll slide back in freely. Once you have the housing seated and bottomed out, now you can go ahead and put your keeper spanner nut back in and tighten it back down. Should be able to spin in by hand just like I'm doing here. And once you get near the bottom, you should be able to get your spanner in there, or I'm going to cheat a little bit here. This is what spanner wrench would be nice, but I don't have one. And remember, this is left-hand thread, so counterclockwise will tighten. And remember, with a hammer and shock, you can actually get things tighter than you can just by wrenching. So be gentle, be careful with it. Seems to be going in pretty nice. And with this, you'll feel it bottom out. You can feel it go from moving to a more solid blow. Like that, that's tightened up. That's not going anywhere. Once you've got your locking collar in there, you're ready to put your washer on. We got to put some marine grease on here, because you always want to stand a chance of getting this back off in the future. So slather this in marine grease all in the splines, and then install your prop and your collar and your nut. Okay, last but not least, on the top of the gearbox where the drive shaft goes into is where your water pump housing is. There's a seal there and an O-ring here that are very important. These are that outside O-ring there, and this seal in here keeps your water from getting in and your oil from getting out. So that'll go right down there and seat just like that. All that's left to do is put the rubber piece in here. The copper tube will run into your pickup area, and then we've got a pump housing top piece like this that'll go on after I put my new impeller in there. And then we'll fill it with gear oil. We'll do that next. Well, folks, I hope you found this episode informative and helpful. That's the complete disassembly and reassembly and new bearings and new seals installed into a 9.9 Mercury. Hey, buddy, come here. There's my little buddy. Oh, nope, he ain't gonna let me get near him. All right. But as you can see, nothing crazy complicated. This gearbox originally, when you did this, just howled. And now you can just hear oil and gears and bearings working together harmoniously with no rust pits on bearings. Because when I drained this one originally, nothing but water came out. Now she's 100% sealed up. All that's left on this particular item is, or this gearbox, is I've got an impeller coming that I don't have yet. And I've also got, besides the impeller, I've got the, just the impeller. Yeah, all I got left to put on this is the impeller, the little copper tube that goes from A to B here. And once that's in and the cap on, this is ready to go installed back onto the outboard. Simple as can be. We'll grease up this spline in here. We'll grease up this spline on the shift shaft. We'll stick it back in there, and the gearbox will be complete. And I did actually grab onto here and put it in forward, neutral, and reverse. Works exactly like it should. So we're in good shape now. This thing is ready to be married back up to its engine counterpart and hopefully give many, many, many more years of wonderful service. Now, what took this one out is somebody didn't check it on a regular basis and didn't change the oil every season and didn't do all the proper maintenance. Otherwise, water would have never ended up in there, because you would have caught it long before that happened, because the oil was gone. I mean, completely gone, and nothing but oil or nothing but water left. I did retop it off. That's one thing you want to make sure. Fill it up from the bottom, hole up at the top, fill it from the bottom. You got to force everything up through. And never try to fill it from the top down. That's just a bad practice. Just won't work for you. It won't come out well. They make pumps for these things. You've seen it plenty of times in my other videos. Fill it up from the bottom. Now this thing is going to be liquid tight. Nothing can get in, nothing can get out, and it's going to be quiet. It's just, I'm just tickled with how this turned out. It's perfect, and we'll see you on the next video. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and this is Michael saying, if it ain't broke, fix it till it is, and we'll see you on the next video.